Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome to episode 4 of the Kelsey Martin podcast. I am Kelsey Martin, and I sat down recently with my best friend and midwife assistant, Victoria Kelson, as well as my wonderful husband, Jay Martin, and we talked about the big home birth I had just 3.5 months ago. And I wanted to share the story with all of you. So, here we are. I feel like I'm using my news anchor voice right now. This is a little embarrassing. Okay. So, this podcast will be available in audio, but it's also available in video. And I want to warn my audience that I did my best. I first of all want to apologize to my birth photographer, Rachel Wilson, aka When a Belly Blooms is her Instagram handle. I hope she's okay with how I censored the images. I did my best to make it look, to not completely soil the beautiful work she did, but I did what I could. So let's preface with birth is raw, birth is primal, and birth can be considered a little graphic for some people. So if you want to hear this, but you don't necessarily want to see, I don't get into I'm not showing the most nitty gritty details here, okay? Be honest. But there are still aspects of it that might be considered a little too much for some people. For instance, I was pretty much naked for the majority of the time I was in labor because that's what I desired. And it was completely natural for me to do that. Hi, honey. My doggie is coming by to say hi. It was completely natural for me to want to not be wearing clothing, but it comes through in the pictures, and so I censored appropriately. But, there's still shots that show a lot, and there are shots of raw, freshly birthed placenta and raw, freshly birthed baby. And if that's a little too much for you, I implore you to check out the audio instead. So that disclaimer is out there. I just wanted to let you know that's the case. Okay. The provider I had for my birth was Eden Midwifery, aka Crystal Massey, and I received unbelievable, beautiful, wonderful care that made me feel extremely safe giving birth at home, especially as someone who, prior to a couple years ago, I never thought of myself as a home birth person. I didn't even know that was possible, to be honest. I was a hospital birth all the way kind of person, and it was after some educating and just meeting women who birthed at home, it made me realize that that's maybe what I wanted, and I'm really glad I chose it. It's not for everybody, but it was perfect for what I needed for birthing my child. So not only is Eden Midwifery a wonderful midwife provider for at-home births, they are also starting a birth center called the Oregon Birth and Wellness Center, which I will link in the description, that basically is asking for donations in order to get the birth center going. There's not a lot of donations that they need. It's mostly for some odds and ends because grants were granted, etc. But I would like to put it out in the universe just so maybe they can get a little extra help from the people who are listening to this and want to support a provider who is providing exceptional care to birthing people in our community. So I want to say that we definitely didn't plan for a sitter for when we filmed this podcast. It was kind of just let's just do it kind of thing. And baby is present for the entirety of it, and thankfully my wonderful husband helped soothe him and kind of keep him engaged and happy while we were filming. But there are baby noises. I breastfeed occasionally throughout the podcast interview, and sometimes he's a little loud when he's eating. It happens, but you will hear that in the audio. Additionally, you will also notice that audio gets kind of weird at the end, and that's because one of our cameras, the camera that had the actual mic attached, decided to stop filming toward the end. They both eventually chose to stop filming toward the end, and so we didn't really reach, there's not really a conclusive finish to the episode, but I still think it ends quite well in spite of that. Please excuse baby noises, please excuse breastfeeding noises. Images and videos were censored to the best of my ability, but they could still be considered graphic to some, and so I think make your own decision about that. And check out the Oregon Birth and Wellness Center and Eden Midwifery and show them your support, because they are doing amazing things. And check out When a Belly Blooms on Instagram. She was my birth photographer, and not only is she an incredible photographer who I almost barely even noticed was there while I was in this extremely vulnerable state, she has also become like a wonderful friend to me and someone who I feel like I can talk to about a lot of things, and I feel a lot of gratitude about that. And I just want I want the world to know about her awesome photography skills, and thus that's why I included the birth photos. So yeah, my baby's waking up. That's the end of this intro. I love you all and enjoy the episode. Welcome to a very special episode. Okay, maybe the third or fourth episode, I haven't kept count, of the Kelsey Martin podcast. I am here with my best friend, doula, and midwife assistant, Victoria Kelson.
Hello.
And she's also a wonderful childbirth educator, and she taught me about childbirth. She taught me everything I know. And then my wonderful partner, Jay Martin.
Hello.
And here's baby boy. Do you want to set him right there? Perfect. Okay, put my bra away. I was just breastfeeding. Okay. So this episode is about my birth. So about 6 or 7 months ago, I interviewed a midwife and talked about home birth and talked about how important it is for women to have the accessibility to give birth at home, which, you know, a lot of that was taught to me by Victoria here, who home birthed herself. Well, you didn't home birth yourself. You home birthed the child, but you did it yourself. And I suppose this is me saying I can talk the talk, but I can also walk the walk. And I had a home birth myself, and I wanted to share it with you all. So, these two cameras looking at me. But first, what I wanted to do was watch my birth video for the first time. I'm about 3 months postpartum. I'm just exiting my 4th trimester, which, if you aren't familiar, can you explain what 4th trimester is? Because that sounds really unfamiliar, I'm sure, to a lot of people.
Yeah. So the 4th trimester is basically the last 3 months of the phase of gestating a child. So there's a theory where most mammals gestate their young for many more months than humans do. But if our children were to gestate any longer than about 40 to 42 weeks, they just wouldn't fit. They'd get too big. So they're born around 42 weeks. sometimes a little earlier. And then the idea behind the fourth trimester is that our young are continuing to gestate just outside of our bodies, but are still like touching our bodies and are being nourished by the breast. So the fourth trimester is basically, a trimester is 3 months. So it's the 3 months following the first day of postpartum. And then when you exit that phase, it sort of exits the full gestating phase. And that's when parents usually start like leaving their homes and really integrating into life with their new one.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so to kind of celebrate that, I've looked at my birth photos and they're beautiful, done by the amazing Rachel Wilson, but I have not witnessed my birth video. I had a tiny preview of the sound of it the day after I gave birth when my husband was watching it, and I had to demand that he mute the sound because there's no way I could hear that right after. So I guess I'll watch that video and maybe it'll invoke some memories, but I can also just say it was a very difficult birth, and there's trauma in birth to some extent. Luckily, the trauma of mine was not one that I couldn't process, and I feel like I had a really great time processing it just because I felt really supported. And so I'm going to watch the video. I am deathly afraid of it, but here we go. I chose to not include the recording of me watching the video, but you can guess there was an emotional reaction, and it was quite beautiful, and I was very grateful to watch it. I think, or at least because I've been writing his birth story in his journal for the last few weeks, but I think an integral part of the birth story is the couple weeks beforehand when I thought I was going into labor. And I guess to give some context, exactly 2 years before the day that I thought I was going into labor was the night I made the prayer into the fire for a child. And I coincidentally put some cedar in the fire and said, "I want a baby," in front of a lot of people. And 2 years later, I am about 38 weeks pregnant, and I was just sitting, and all of a sudden, this goes back a little bit further than that. Hours before that, I was laying in bed trying to sleep, trying to connect to what his spirit animal was, because that's what I was deciding I wanted to do that night. And I suddenly had this moment where I was going in and out of sleep, and I had this moment where I just completely felt this like rush cascade through my body. I felt a rush between my legs that felt like my water breaking. And my first thought was, I need to turn to Jay and tell him it's time. And then I realized I couldn't move my body. And then I realized I was having sleep paralysis. And then I woke up and I thought to myself, is that what it's going to feel like? Because that sounds a lot like what you had described, your experience of going into labor was. And so the next day, I felt pretty normal. Everything was going normally. And then he left the house for the first time, like in a while, without me. And because we were kind of just like hanging out at home, staying near the home. And I felt that rush over me. And that rush lasted for over 24 hours. And and you came over, and I was having regular contractions to some extent, and we really thought that was the time. And then the next morning it continued, and then the morning after that, nothing, and it stopped. and it stopped for like 2 weeks. And what was your experience with that? Because I'm curious, as like the doula and midwife assistant that I was calling in and saying, hey, I'm having this experience. This feels like this is it. What was your perspective on that, and like what was your experience in that?
I remember I was at Bring and at the store, and you called me and you said, I just had this huge like wave of energy come over me, and you described it and it sounded a lot like the way that I went into labor as well when I went into early labor, like the head change and the euphoria and sort of like experiencing that hormonal cascade like flood over you that happens right when you go into labor. So I also was feeling, just because of the talk of like your history and your mom having quick labors, that your labor would be quick. So I was like, rush. And I think that energy of like rush sort of like set the tone for not just me in particular, but I think everyone responded with a sense of rush to that first sensation of early labor. And labor is really shy, and I think that it's possible that all of that rush perhaps caused the labor to cease. Early labor to me is like labor sort of dipping its toes in the water and saying like, is it time to labor? Is it safe to labor? And then any sort of that excitement can translate to adrenaline in the body. And so even though you're feeling excited and feeling ready and well supported, the body is feeling actually that it's stressed out. And so labor is not going to continue most of the time. And so that was a lesson, I think, for me in telling people now not to like tell everyone when they first go into early labor, because of that excitement and us probably thinking labor would be quick, I think inspired you and the team to share with all of your support people that we thought early labor was happening, and then all the expectations and the clock, started ticking on everyone. And I wonder if that is what kind of slowed things down a little bit. But when I got there, I remember you were totally in the spell of early labor, like the labor land, the euphoria, all the oxytocin being released in someone's system, and how that translates in my perception. You really looked like you were in early labor. And I got there and I was like, whoa, we're totally having a baby soon, because your contractions were regular. There was a pattern and they were long. And then also you just had to like close your eyes and breathe really deep, and I could tell like you were in that state. And so that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to clean your house and like prepare some things logistically and let some people know. And I think we did some positioning stuff, and then I just gave you guys privacy, and then it fizzled out.
Which was devastating to me. What was your experience with that?
Not devastation for me, but just, I suppose I was beginning to feel impatient with the process of having to stay home all of the time and be kind of at the ready. I was ready for it to happen. I wanted him out. And so it was mildly disappointing, but it all ended up being for the best, I think. Got a little bit more time to prepare ourselves emotionally and logistically, so I'm personally glad that didn't happen then.
Yeah, I agree. I remember feeling really devastated about it, just because I was like, I'm ready for this to happen. I think like it was I just felt very emotionally charged about it, and I allowed myself. And then so I went the route of just really isolating myself after that, because I was experiencing what I perceived as pressure from other people, which probably wasn't. Most of the time it's not actually pressure. It's people who are loving you, who just want to know what's going on. And I just cut off my phone. I was like, if you need to contact me, contact Jay. I need to be in my bubble, and I need to just distance myself from everything, including like social events, everything. And and Jay hung out with me in that space, and it was really good. It was hard. We definitely had to like kind of ride some waves of impatience and worry and like timing. Is timing going to be okay? Like if this guy comes out like 2 weeks past the due date, that gives him a week postpartum with me. And we were like, how do we make it so that he can get the time that we want together postpartum and all that stuff? It was just it created a lot of inner turmoil, and it was really important, we realize now, for us to process that, move through it, and then reach a state of acceptance. And then almost like just like a few days shy of 2 weeks later, I spent the Friday the 18th, I spent it just meditating. I like meditated almost the whole day and sat in front of my altar, listened to the birth affirmations you sent me that's from the Free Birth Society podcast, right? And listened to those affirmations and just really like settled in. And then the next morning I sat in front of my birth altar and I said, because my dad was going to be in town and he was only going to be in town that weekend. And it was like, okay, I cannot let this pressure sit on me, but also, hey, if there's a great time for you to arrive, this is it. And I said that prayer, I took my tincture, and then within minutes, my water broke. And it was like a tiny rush. It wasn't the big rush that I expected. It was this tiny rush, and I was like, I wet my pants a little bit. This doesn't seem like pee. And because, when you're pregnant, you kind of pee yourself a lot. And then I started noticing a couple more rushes after that. That's when I got a hold of you. I woke you up. It was 11 a.m. and I was like, how am I waking her up right now? And then it was because you had just been at an all-night birth.
Yeah, Crystal and I had an all-night birth not too far from where you guys live. And we were done at 8 in the morning. And I got home at like 8:30, 9. I fell asleep around 9, and then I woke up to you saying that you thought your water had broke, and I was so tired. And it's possible for sometimes like the waters to release in one spot and the bag to sort of fold over itself, or sometimes moms like pee themselves, and they're not sure if it's like what fluid it is. So I said like, okay, it could be this, it could be that, but just keep going about your day, and call me if you notice like more water rushing. And then I like promptly fell back to sleep. And then when I woke up a couple hours later, I was like, wait a second. I was a little too tired at the time. But
and what happened with that was I wasn't having any contractions, which is normal, for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Your water can break, but you don't have the early labor or the contractions. You're just kind of... And how long can your bag of waters be open before you kind of... Because at a certain point, I had to kind of help myself get things moving, right?
Yeah, you did castor oil?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty common form of labor induction, but only 10% of the time the bag of waters ruptures before labor begins. And what we see in movies is that like the water ruptures first, but that really doesn't happen often. But when it does happen, the risk of infection increases after 48 hours. So most like care providers want to see you starting to labor around 24. If you were in a hospital situation, they'd probably bring you in and put you on Pitocin immediately to induce your labor, which I don't feel is the best course of action for everybody. Sometimes labor just needs a little bit of a nudge, and the small amount of castor oil, small dosed out castor oil in appropriate amounts, works really well in our practice.
And so castor oil is a benefit in that it can induce without like really any major side effects, besides maybe like
little diarrhea.
But what can be the positives or negatives of Pitocin for someone who is in a hospital setting and is getting that?
Yeah, Pitocin is very effective at stimulating the uterus, but it stimulates the uterus artificially. And so the the negative side of that is that it's going to make labor more painful and more difficult for people. There's also like having an IV in their arm and having a Pitocin drip. The IV can be bothersome to some people. There's also a recent study that came out that said women who get Pitocin inductions for labor are 36% more likely to develop postpartum depression. And that's because Pitocin is that synthetic form of oxytocin. So it sort of artificially pushes your body into labor. If you were to do something to encourage your labor naturally, like stripping your membranes, drinking castor oil, what that does is it primes the body. It releases prostaglandins, which are the precursors for the hormonal matrix to like unfold itself. So you still went into labor naturally. You just gave your body like a little boost. People who get Pitocin, they're not going into labor naturally. They're being forced into labor with an artificial chemical, and that does alter hormones. So they don't have the same natural like cascade. And then Pitocin can also increase edema, so people can retain water, and that can make your breasts a little bit enlarged and flatten your nipples and make breastfeeding a little difficult as well.
Wow.
So yeah.
So there's a lot of, and there are situations where it seems 100% necessary, but like not all situations.
No, having an open bag of waters is not it in itself with no other reason, nothing else happening. There's no reason to go get a Pitocin induction. And the reason why they do that is because they're worried about infection. But if you're having frequent vaginal exams in a foreign environment with bacteria that you're not used to being around, and people are putting their fingers up your vagina, they're putting bacteria from that side of the vagina up into the cervix, and that's really increasing your risk for infection much more. But if you stayed in a home environment and you kept clean underwear on and you're not having sex and you're just maintaining vaginal hygiene and not getting a lot of cervical exams, it doesn't really, the risk of infection is not as high,
Yeah, that makes sense. So I did the castor oil. His mother came over, who an essential part of our birth team. She was a labor and delivery nurse, and so it was really great having her there. It was actually what a friend of mine described as the ultimate birth committee, because she knew Crystal, the midwife, from working with her previously. And then you were my doula, my best friend, but you also were assistant to Crystal as a midwife, and because you're training under her. And it's like this like really cool interconnected like team of women who all know birth really well, but also know me really well, and I can feel most comfortable with. And there was actually supposed to be another person, like there was supposed to be extra people in the birth team, but like it just came down to the core, which was really great, and which was like really lined up with the birth plan I wanted. And and Rachel being there as my birth photographer, who was just fabulous and amazing, and just I could sing her praises all day. She was incredible.
When a belly blooms.
It was like the ideal birth team. So he gets his mom to come over, and she's here, and I am in the bedroom, and it's about 8, 9, 10 p.m. and I'm having full contractions, like contractions where, because I'm just like, I'm sitting on my phone and I'm just browsing, because I'm like, I need to rest, but I can't really fall asleep, so I'm just like going through my phone, and I recognize that the contractions are intense enough when it's a situation where I have to put down my phone because I can't concentrate on whatever media I'm consuming because the contractions are too strong. And I was in the bedroom doing that for like an hour is what it felt like. And then Jay came in, and I was like, these are really strong. And so we got a hold of you, and you came by.
Yeah, Jay called me at like 10:30, I think, p.m. Go ahead.
Oh, well, just for reference also, my mom happened to be there already, because she had been coming over and staying the night anytime it seemed like Kelsey might go into labor, since she lives about an hour away, so that she wouldn't have to drive all that way when it did happen. So she was over already, and her and I had been up talking until about 10:30, 11, something like that. And when I went back into the bedroom to find Kelsey contracting, it was to go to bed because I was exhausted from a long day already. And that was just the beginning of a very long labor process. And needless to say, did not get very much sleep from that point forward.
Right. Yeah. So you came over to kind of just like check on everything ahead of Crystal. It became clear that we were going to have to set up the birth tub and everything. And can you tell me your experience? Because my experience, I got to say, from this point on, is just like, I'm contracting and then I'm trying to sleep. I'm contracting and then I'm trying to sleep. And you were up all night, pretty much. You and Jay were up all night with me.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I first want to clarify. So I was going to be your doula, and I did some doula stuff with you guys prenatally. And then I happened to be, you hired Crystal, and I'm also her assistant midwife, but we were going to be in different roles. There's a huge difference between a midwife assistant and a doula, and we talked about like keeping a clear separation between those two things. And then her assistant got sick on the day that you went into labor, and so that's why I decided, like, okay, I guess I'm going to be the assistant, and maybe that's just for the best. And I talked to you about it, and I remember you said, like, I accept these changes of plans or something like that. And so, and assistant midwives do doula stuff, and I was doing doula stuff with you, but ended up filling that role. So Jay called me, and he was like, Kelsey is having contractions and she's going, throughout that. You like made the sounds to describe them for me. And I was like, okay, that sounds like labor. So I packed up and I ran over. I think I grabbed Dutch Bros was open. I grabbed a latte first and I came over.
Didn't get me one.
I'm sorry. I didn't get you. I probably should have gotten you one. And I came in the room and I was in my scrubs, and I remember you said, look, you're in your scrubs, and I gave you a little twirl, and I was like, oh yes, I'm assistant midwife Victoria, here to take your vitals. And we had a little laugh. That was when you were still kind of in the early phase of labor and could laugh about things. A little bit easier. But yeah, I just took some vitals on you and your baby, and everyone sounded good. And then I talked to Crystal. I was kind of waiting until your labor intensified to call her over, but it seemed apparent that the birth pool would be a good tool for you. And I think I remember you saying that you were uncomfortable or you wanted something different. I don't really exactly. Do you remember?
Yeah, that was pretty much like every like hour or two. It was like, I need something different. Yeah, pretty much was my experience, because I was like, well, maybe there's a different positioning I could get into, or maybe there's something different, so having making the birth pool accessible and thinking, well, if I labor in it, I've heard like you're less likely to tear as much, or if at all, and so that also sounded really appealing to me. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I went to Crystal's house and I got the pool, and then I came back, and you were in like you were definitely in active labor, but the earlier phase of active labor. So I was only checking your vitals every 30 minutes. You could still like kind of talk between contractions, but you definitely needed to like use some sort of coping mechanism, which was like the moaning. And you guys were so beautiful. I remember when I came back and I was setting up the pool, I went and checked on you, and things had definitely intensified. And they were like every 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes apart. Your contractions were really close together for the whole thing. And I remember you were laying on your side and Jay was spooning you and holding you. And it was so beautiful to see, and you guys were resting in between, and then when your contraction would start, he would like kind of like, perk up and like hold you and just be actively present and actively holding you through it and breathing with you. It was really beautiful to see. Yeah. So we kind of, that was, I remember like, I think there was one contraction that Jay wasn't present for, and that's the one that I held, where I held you. And that was like toward the end of the active labor. Do you remember much from that, like just like that beginning intro to active labor?
Yeah, I remember being there with you, just kind of how you described, trying to sleep for a couple minutes at a time between contractions, and then getting up and holding you and just being with you, trying to just hold space for you as best as I could.
So, okay, so you set up the pool, and I get in the pool. I think, was that around the time that I think I vomited at one point, like right around the beginning toward the pool being set up, right?
Yeah, I think Jay was caring for you while that was happening. I think Danette came in too, and she was helping me. She was helping me with setting up the pool and boiling water, and I appointed her as the water woman, and she was in charge of boiling water and just keeping the temperature of the pool.
Nice.
So I think we were doing that while you and Jay were tending to what was happening with you, which I think vomiting did happen. I think I remember hearing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I moved out to the pool, and I labored in the pool for a while. And God, it just like it all like kind of fades together, but I just remember the contractions it was slow, but it was progressively more and more difficult. The contractions were getting really hard. And I went into the birth, like, 'cause, I took your childbirth class, and like I was really hopeful that I had done what I needed to do to ensure that he came out, because he was like ROA in the womb, like he was in an ideal position to start for his progression downward. So yeah, the contractions were just getting progressively harder, and I had this hope in my head that he was gonna be OA. Which, can you explain the difference between OA and OP?
Yeah, so there is occiput anterior and there's occiput posterior. Occiput means it's measured by the infant's anatomy in relationship to the mother's anatomy. So the occipital lobe, basically like the back of the baby's head, when the back of the baby's head is facing the anterior wall of the uterus, which is basically the front wall, then that means that the baby is anterior. If the occipital lobe, the back of the baby's head, is facing posterior, the back of the mother's uterus or vaginal canal, then the baby is posterior. So we want babies to be anterior. That's the more favorable position of moving through the pelvis, and for whatever reason, sometimes due to pelvic congestion or shape, like different pelvis shapes, babies want to come through in a more posterior position, which works obviously, and you're living proof that it works. But there is a little bit, the back of the head kind of it's a little bit bigger than the face, and so when the back of the head has to like work its way past the tailbone and the sacrum, it's more challenging, and usually babies, they get a little bit stuck. Could you hold this for me?
Oh yeah.
Oh, thank you. For the video, if the baby's head is coming down, if this is their face and this is the pubic bone, sometimes they kind of hit the pubic bone a little bit trying to work under the tailbone, and they have to like really get under and be able to come through, and that could be just a little more challenging and takes more time. Yeah. But it works. It's just, it's a little harder.
Right. And there's like trigger points that they would hit if they're OA, which usually kind of incites the fetal ejection reflex, where you get like giving birth in your car basically on your way to the hospital kind of thing.
Yeah, the pushing reflex without control. Yeah, so if the back of the baby's head, since it does like protrude out a little bit more than the face does, if the back of the head is facing forward, as the baby's coming down the vaginal canal, it's pushing on certain pressure points that are activating the fetal ejection reflex. But if the baby's faced the other way and it's coming down where the back of the head would normally be hitting the vaginal canal, it's now the face, and the face it just doesn't push out as far. So there's a little bit of an empty space there. Yeah.
And so my hope was, okay, OA baby, don't have to actively push.
Most of the time. It's different for everyone. Everyone has different anatomy, but most of the time from what I've seen, if a baby is OA, so their head is like facing forward and they're coming down, then your body will naturally like respond to the sensation of them pushing against the vaginal wall, and it'll just start pushing on its own. And pushing for so many people is more who are having an unmedicated birth with an OA baby. Sometimes OP babies, but not always. Yeah. Their body will just push their baby out on its own. But with an OP baby, they need a lot more work to kind of wiggle their way through, and they're not pushing on the same, pressure point. So you were not getting the sensation to push. Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, that was, I think, when I realized, what were we, like 10 hours in or 11 hours in.
Yeah, so if you started active labor around 10:30 p.m. when Jay called me, and then you were to when you started pushing, you pushed for like
I think it was 4 hours.
or 4 hours.
About just over 3.5 hours.
3.5 hours. Okay, yeah. So that would be, and he was born at
1:52 p.m.
1:52. Yeah. So if we do the math, that's 10 a.m. 10:30 a.m. So it was like 12 hours of labor.
Yeah.
Until you started pushing.
Yeah, so it was about like hour 11 or 12 where the contractions were really intense, and I was having serious lower back pain, which I had learned from your class often meant that like the baby's head is like kind of hitting the tailbone
or compressing on nerves.
Yeah, compressing on nerves, and I think I was like watching as you were monitoring him as he moved downward, and I noticed that you were monitoring him like way into my pelvis, and I was like, oh, he's in my birth canal, and I don't have any urge to push.
Yeah.
And this baby is OP for sure. Like, no one told me. I just knew. And I was like, dang it. I was like, this is not what I wanted. But it was like, but there was like, this moment where I was like, okay, this is how things are going to go. We could do this. And so, and then, so you recognizing that he was in my birth canal, and you kind of called in Crystal, and you're like, it's pretty much time to start pushing, and I moved out to the tub.
Yeah, so I think we skipped ahead a little bit. You were in the tub in the living room for a while.
Yes.
And then Rachel came over, Crystal came over. Your contractions were 2 minutes apart. From then on out, they were 2 to 3 minutes apart. And that's why I was thinking like, wow, things are getting pretty intense. And you were like clearly like in between contractions needing to rest, and like you weren't talking in between them. Things were definitely really intense. And so the whole team came over, and you labored in the living room for several hours. And then afterwards you felt like, okay, I'm done with the tub, I need to go lay down in my room. And so you and Jay went to lay down, and then either me or Crystal, sometimes Danette would come and Rachel would come as well, but usually it was just me every 15 minutes coming in, and I just listened to baby's heart tones and listened to your pulse, and then would leave, and you guys were just sleeping in between, and you were cuddling and holding each other, and that was most of your labor. I think you were in there for many hours.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
And then at 8 a.m. I went in there and I listened to heart tones, and you said, I'm feeling this burning in my vagina. And that signaled to me, okay, that sounds like the baby you're fully dilated, and your baby's head is starting to descend. So I went and told Crystal that, and Crystal was like, cool, she'll probably want to start pushing soon. So we waited, and we waited, and we waited, but nothing happened. And then Crystal came in and recommended doing a vaginal exam at that point. Maybe, I'm not sure exactly how much longer later, but after you were not signaling any sensation to push, and you were completely dilated, and she could feel your baby's head right there. But that's also when she discovered that your baby was OP, and that was why you weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, we both I kind of clued in on my own, in my own way to that, because I was like, this can't be right. He's so far down, and I should feel some kind of urge to push. And then like Crystal confirmed it, and then so we're like, okay, well, let's move out to the tub to push. And Jay climbed in the tub with me, and we all got set up, and I pushed for a very long time. I think I was in the tub for 3 hours or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That's what Rachel told me.
Yeah, you were in the tub for a really long time. I think the first hour was actually, you did push for 3 hours, but there was an hour of sort of like getting you to the place of pushing before you actually started pushing. And then you did push for 3 hours after that with each contraction. But I think the first hour we were trying to teach you, because you weren't having any sensation to push. And so there was sort of like a need for support and like guiding you as to like where to push. And people with OP babies usually need that guidance because they can't feel like where where to push.
Where am I supposed to concentrate this energy out? And so that was super intense. And I gotta say that I can't totally remember, because I think my body's biologically trying to make me forget so that I'll try again. I could feel his head stuck between my pubic and tailbone. And it was just like, the pain was just so much, like more than I thought I could ever handle. And yet I was and she would always encourage me to push at the start of a contraction, but at the very beginning of the contraction, I could not push because I was in so much pain. And then as the contraction would start to subside, and that's when I felt like I could push. And then we'd be building up, and we'd be like, okay, it's happening. And then the contraction would stop. And Crystal would encourage me to like, hey, maybe take a break, let yourself relax, which I'm grateful for, because I probably would have just kept hunkering down the whole time. And there was just a lot of changing positions. I tried all fours, and I was like, no. I tried, so many different like methods. I was just like, what is the most ideal way? And it kind of came to this place where I was like, there is not really an ideal way. This is just gonna have to be really, really painful. And this is like the thought process in my mind. And I say this a lot, but I remember, like, I hear a lot of birth stories where they say, the woman says, I can't do this. And that's when she's about to give birth. And I didn't want to disappoint myself, because I knew what that statement could mean in the scheme of things. And so I didn't want to say it out loud, because I didn't want to be disappointed when that wasn't my portal into him emerging. So I like went through I can't do this in my head, and then I'd be like, no, you have to. And then I'd like run through the options, like, well, what if I did transfer to a hospital? Or what if I did do this? Like, what would happen in that circumstance? Or what if I just say, I can't do this at all, and I just relinquish all of my power?
Yeah, with transition, like most people enter transition when they're like 8 to 10 centimeters dilated, and the head is pressing against the cervix, and it fully dilates, and then the baby starts to descend. And right in that moment, or the moments, usually anywhere from like 5 to 20 minutes, when the baby's head is like fully dilating the cervix and they just start to descend, that's that transition piece. And that's usually when people say, oh no, I can't do this anymore. They start to become doubtful or irritable. And that's because of all the adrenaline that's rushing through their body. And adrenaline is released in transition at that time to sort of give you an energy boost to push your baby out. But when your baby's OP and the cervix is dilating a little slower or even unevenly, sometimes with OP babies, there's an anterior lip, like the upper lip of the cervix, stays and kind of holds the baby's head back like a rubber band. And sometimes that's why a little bit of directed pushing or a vaginal exam can be supportive, because they can actually go in and kind of hold that band up for the baby to move down. But what that means is that experience of being in transition but not shifting into the pushing phase, it just prolongs and prolongs. And transition is like a really intense period. And your transition period lasted a really long time. Yeah. I think from 8 a.m., from when you were fully dilated to when you were actively pushing, was like 11, 12, like 11:30, right? 11:30, 12:30, 1:30, maybe 10:30.
I think 10:30,
11:30, 12:30, 1:30. Yeah, like 10:30. So that's like 2.5 hours of transition. Yeah.
And how long is that normally supposed to last?
Like 5 to 20 minutes.
Oh my God.
So the experience of me just like, oh, I'm in severe pain. I have no inclination to push, but I know this baby's moving into my birth canal, and this, I'm pushing. I'm struggling, and I'm basically negotiating with myself in my head, like what can I do differently? Can I give up? Should I give up? No, I can't give up. No, I have to see this through. The only way to see this through is through.
I'm wondering if you're open to speaking to how like the directed pushing went.
The directed pushing was super helpful for me. Because there was no way. I mean, like, I've heard, like, I've done Kegels, I know that, but there was this added element of, to be quite frank, it pushes if you're pooping, basically. And that was, like, the very honest, and I'm sure, like, anyone in a midwife or an obstetrician's or a nurse's position is going to be as brutally honest as possible. And it's like, you are going to push like this. And it brought a lot of clarity for me. And then being reminded to stop and take breaks was the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. It's like, even when we just, his head's right there, we're just about to crown, and then it would stop, and then she would just be like, you need to just rest. And so we did that for a while, and you climbed in the tub with me, like pretty much at the beginning, right?
I don't know about the beginning. I feel like maybe close to halfway through.
Yeah. Halfway through, yeah.
I remember.
Yeah, and just like held me in the tub and like sat with me and just in different positions, and I was just like, I think there's a moment where like Crystal held me because I was just like, this is just beyond, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I know a lot of women say that about birth because it's true. It's like the hardest thing, mm-hmm. but not in a bad way. Like that conscious, like I can only move through by moving through. I can only move through by moving through. And just reminding myself of that. And so we just like continued, and I just remember like there's just these moments where I was feeling really, I had a moment where I was feeling really guilty because I was like, Rachel has been here for so long and I still haven't given birth to this baby. And I looked to her like while I'm between pushing, and she just gives me this look, and she's wearing a mask, but her eyes like are just like compassion, sweet compassion and encouragement, and just so many things all wrapped up in this one look in her beautiful eyes. And I'm just like, okay, I could do this. And I don't know, it was like that. I remember that eye contact so vividly. Like she was standing right there, pool was right here, and I'm just like looking at her, feeling apologetic, and she's just like, you have nothing to apologize for. And she doesn't say a word, she just says it all with one look, and I'm just like, okay. And I think it was like moments after that where I was like, I need to change something about my circumstances because what we're doing isn't working for me. And so I just like pop up out of the tub, and I'm just like, I can't be in the water anymore, is what I remember saying, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we tried standing, I think, for a while.
Yeah.
For like 2 minutes.
Yeah, we tried. Can I talk about positioning really quick? So your whole labor when you were on the bed, mm-hmm. which was probably over half of your labor, was like laying in your bed, and then also laying out here on the couch. We did just side lying on one side, side lying on another side, with like in a spinning baby's position. So your one leg is back, the other leg is kind of lifted to help open the pelvis. And that's what you needed to do, I think, to rest, because your labor was long and it took a lot of work to get your baby out. But I do remember the cure to getting an OP baby out is doing a whole lot of different positions for most people. Yeah. And I remember we kept offering you positions, and you were like just so tired. And I think that putting one leg up on the tub was what we did, right?
Yeah.
We had you stand and do a contraction, like standing lunge with one leg on the tub, and you were like, this is not working for me.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know, did you want to touch base on your experience at that point? Because I've been pushing for a really long time. And
oh my god, I mostly just remembered it being like just felt like it was lasting forever, like a really long car ride or something. And like looking at my hands and feet that were soaked in the tub, just getting like pruny, and and white, and just every contraction thinking, okay, maybe this is gonna be the one, but it never was. It just kind of kept going. It was a marathon. It felt like it was like an emotional endurance race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
I also want to touch on the fact that we consciously chose to not find out his gender before he was born. And so we all like were kind of coming in like with our own like subtle expectations to some extent. But it was really funny what happened with you and Crystal, which I thought would be fun to touch on before the actual birthing happens in the story.
Yeah. So we did the ultrasound at 36 weeks, and I was there for your ultrasound. And Crystal, there was another couple in our practice who were a similar gestation as you. And Crystal thought that one gender was the opposite of the other gender, but she didn't remember which one was which. And at your 36 weeks, she said, like, look, I see the gender on the screen. Like, look at this. And you guys turned away, and I looked, and I was like, I have no idea. I had to see that. Like, it didn't make sense to me. But she knew, and I just decided I wanted to remain not knowing as well. But then when we were at the labor the night before your labor, Crystal said, all right, the gender of this baby, I remember, is going to be the flip to Jay and Kelsey's baby. And so they had a boy, and Crystal just saw it wrong, I think, or she forgot. She probably just got it mixed up. But so they had a boy, and I was like, oh my gosh, Jay and Kelsey are having a girl. And I always thought you were having a boy. It was very clear to me that you were having a boy, and I had dreams about you having a boy. And then I was like, they're having a girl, and then you had a boy. But what that did for me was I was so sure. I was like, yes, you were having a boy. I was so sure you were having a boy. And
so was Crystal. She was super sure.
And we were super sure, yeah. And then we found out that it was a girl by some weird like mind mistake, like a mix-up in Crystal's mind. And what that did was just kind of bring us back into the same place everyone was, which was like the element of surprise.
Yes.
You know, so I weren't like, oh yep, I knew it all along, but we were surprised.
Yeah, you got to be just as surprised as we were.
Yeah.
It's funny because so many other people that are close to us were also so certain that it was a girl.
Yeah.
So funny.
Yeah, my sister wrote a letter to her that started, "Hello, baby girl," with "girl" in all caps. And she wrote a really sweet letter, and at the very bottom she said, "P.S. I'll still love you if you're a boy."
Right? I mean, we did that poll at the Blessing Way, which is a different way of saying baby shower. And the poll was like 15 votes for girl, 10 votes for boy.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
'Cause I came across it in my journal the other day, and I was like, oh, that's funny. Okay, so I am like, need something new. And I'm like, this couch has had my back this whole pregnancy. I have lounged myself so hard on this couch throughout this whole pregnancy, especially during my morning sickness. Like, it was just, this couch has been there for me. So I get right there where Jay's sitting. And I'm like, okay, this is where I want to be. Crystal put some mats under me, make sure that, like, you know, we're catching all the extras that come out when you're birthing. And Jay had one leg and Crystal had the other, and they were both coaching me. And I mean, Jay and Crystal have been coaching me in the tub too. Like, you were just like, you got this, just like really just rooting me on. And like and you could hear it in the birth video where he's just like, you're almost there, like it was. And I think I didn't push all that many times on the couch. I think I pushed maybe 2 times.
You pushed on the couch for a little while, but not very long.
Not very
maybe
long.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, pushing with every contraction that came like a minute apart. So, but you didn't push very long.
Yeah.
I do want to touch on really quick, just for clarity and to like give a reflection for you, the way you were coaching, and the directed pushing. There's a difference between like screaming at someone and saying like, time to push, and like yelling in their face and making them feel like something is wrong, and like giving them that guidance. And the way that you, Jay, were were guiding her and were coaching her was so beautiful. It was so beautiful to see. And those moments where you guys were in the tub but also on the couch, and you had your hands kind of cupped around her vagina and watching the little bit of the head start to crown a little bit and then come back out, and like it's just starting to like appear, and like love and excitement and the affirmations and encouragement you were giving her was really beautiful.
Yeah, it felt really beneficial. He was very encouraging, and it was like, I felt like, okay, I'm doing all the things I can be doing, and I'm doing them right, and we're moving, this is happening. And I was just like, I was pushing him past that pubic bone and tailbone. That Crystal was like, had to like kind of help navigate his head. She had to reach in and help navigate his head out.
Because he was facing your hip. He was facing the side of the room. He came out like that. He was facing your right side.
Yeah. And so I'm pushing, and finally, and like most people describe the Ring of Fire as like Ring of Fire, so intense. But to me, it was like almost this relief, because I was like, you're far away from my pubic bone and tailbone, and stay far away from them, because I'm done having you right there. And so as he started to crown, I was just like, it was painful, but it was like, oh, thank God you're emerging. I am going to meet my baby soon. And I wanted to touch on because you put it in the birth plan that you wanted to catch him. Well, we wanted you to catch him, and also you wanted to like have a moment with him. Can you just talk about that really
sure
quick?
Yeah. One of our friends in our community who has some knowledge of Native American tradition told us that in some Native American traditions it is customary for the father to be the first one to speak to the baby after delivering the baby, and that they are the first ones to speak their name to them, so that when the baby first hears its name, it's from its father, and then passes the baby off to the mother. So that's what we decided we should do. And so when he came out, I whispered in his ear, your name is Jay Cedar. Welcome to our family. We promise to always take care of you. And then tried to pass him to Kelsey, and I think he slipped out a couple of times.
Yeah, slippery.
Flopped all over the place, and then eventually got him to his mom.
It wasn't that messy.
It didn't look that bad in the video, to be honest.
It was like a fucking cartoon.
Yeah, it was. And you had to like, and you were the first. You got to look at his genitalia, and know that what name you were giving him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I clarified afterwards, because I didn't really want to say directly, is it a boy or a girl? I wanted to be like, what's the baby's name? And you told me, and I was like, it's a boy. Okay, so first I just want to talk about just the experience of like the moment after he came into the world, and just how beautifully you responded to that moment, and just touch on just my immense gratitude for you just being so good at holding space for me through the whole labor. Because sometimes you hear unfortunate stories that are like guys like, I'm gonna go out and get a pizza, or like or is just struggling so hard that he needs to find something to complain about, or it's like, aren't you proud of me? I didn't faint, or like, are you kidding me right now? But this guy, he caught his son. I think that's amazing. And you were there for it. You were there with it, and it was just really impressive. Very, very grateful for that. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't that hard.
It wasn't that hard. Yeah. Well, I mean, right.
Not as hard as I didn't have it nearly as bad as you did.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I'm thanking you for what should be considered probably the bare minimum, huh?
Yeah. All
Yeah.
I did was take a bath.
Yeah.
Take a long bath
You took a long bath.
and a bunch of bodily fluids.
Yes, there were bodily
It was
fluids.
beautiful.
I guess, okay, so after he was born, we realized I was hemorrhaging a lot of blood. And so we kind of had to get the placenta out. And can you just, like, kind of describe the, like, medical side of, like, the postpartum, like, immediate postpartum experience? And also, I also wanted you to touch on, because we've talked in the past about how me being in active labor for 12 hours and pushing for almost 4 hours, how that can be perceived differently in different settings outside of a home birth. And I just wanted you to touch on all of that.
Definitely. Yeah. So I guess first I did want to say that what you were talking about with Jay just now. I think when women are given crumbs, we're taught to celebrate and be grateful for anything that's not a crumb. So he did set a beautiful example though of really fulfilling the role of a father and support person so well. So first let's talk about the medical side of postpartum. In postpartum, after the baby is born, you're not really considered to be, the birth process is not complete. You still have to give birth to the placenta. And so many people think like the baby's born and they just kind of move on and they think it's time to like FaceTime with everyone and turn on all the lights and everything gets really, and sometimes light is a helpful tool for assisting a newborn, but it gets a little crazy. And if it gets a little too crazy and too excited, the adrenaline can start releasing in the body, and the adrenaline will block oxytocin. And the oxytocin is needed for the uterus to contract and for the uterus to release the placenta. So it's important to just hold that element of reverence and to keep the tone of birth steady, so the mom can just focus on looking at her baby and kissing her baby and feeling proud of herself and just relishing in those moments. And then all that oxytocin of like having her baby skin to skin, maybe latching the baby, can help the placenta to release. You were hemorrhaging. I was going to deliver your placenta, but it didn't happen. And I haven't spoken with Crystal about the exact details. I remember putting on gloves and I was ready to assist with the placenta. It just took a little bit to come out. And then Crystal took the cord and was tracking it, which is just moving it up and down, working it a little bit, because sometimes the placenta can detach, but it could just kind of sit there in the vagina collecting blood behind it. And so we want to, get it out. The risk of hemorrhage increases after 30 minutes of the placenta being retained in somebody. So it's usually wise to encourage it to come out. So you didn't reach 30 minutes, but you did start like bleeding a significant amount. Hemorrhage is considered to be 500 to 1,000 milliliters of blood, and you were definitely like over 500. Like
it was 800.
Yeah, like 800. Yeah, and we know that because we can weigh the Chuck's pads to identify how much blood was lost. That when the placenta releases, it leaves an open wound in the uterus, and that's where all the bleeding can come out. And so if someone is releasing oxytocin, which is produced through like touching their partner and kissing their partner and holding their baby and latching their baby and feeling safe, the uterus will contract down. It'll clamp down on that open wound, and it'll start shrinking down. It's usually a few hours after birth, about 2 fingers below the navel, where it's like way up high, like up by your ribs, right when you're still pregnant. So it shrinks down a really significant amount. And so oxytocin is needed for that. And so you were getting a lot of oxytocin. Sometimes people's postpartums are interrupted by craziness, or there's a challenge with the baby and it's handled in a stressful way. And so that might cause the placenta to retain, but other times, like for whatever reason with your anatomy or any other circumstances that were just unique to you, the placenta wanted to hang out for a little bit. And so Crystal just had to give your placenta a little assistance to encourage it to come out. And then she asked me to go over and help you latch your baby, because usually latching the baby releases a good flood of oxytocin.
Yeah.
So I remember I was trying to help, but babies usually don't want to nurse like immediately after birth. Sometimes they just kind of want to be for a little while.
Yeah.
So he was interested in thinking about it, but just wasn't quite ready. And so I just remember helping with that, and he wasn't really interested. So I was just kind of holding space and at the ready, in case Crystal asked to give you any Pitocin, which is that synthetic form of oxytocin, which is very life-saving medicine for a hemorrhage. And you didn't need any of that, right?
Right.
Yeah. No. Yeah. You didn't need any of that, which is great. So
yeah, I think I just did the
shepherd's purse
tincture. Yeah, that you made, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one to give people if they're starting to enter what looks like a hemorrhage, because it has septic properties, so it constricts blood vessels, and it's a uterine astringent. But of course, if that's not working, then Pitocin is going to be a good alternative. But yeah, we got that, and then we got the placenta out, and which was important because the uterus can't clamp down when there's a giant organ in it that's very heavy that needs to be released, so that the uterus can like clamp down on that wound and start to contract. So that's why we wanted to get it out. But yeah, she just like kind of worked it out, and then it was born. And it was born right into that bowl.
Yeah.
What was the other thing you wanted me to touch on?
Just the very long active labor and very long pushing, and how that can happen in different settings. I mean, I was in a home birth setting, and his vitals were great like the whole time. Both of our vitals were like really good. I was like pretty good resting heart rate, and and I think that like says a lot. I think it says a lot for maybe being in the home environment, as well as just like we were just doing well, and that was good. But Crystal was super patient with my pushing process, and I'm just curious like how like that might not have gone as well if I had been in a different setting.
Yeah, I mean, you had a 16-hour labor, which is pretty standard for a first-time mom to have a labor that long, sometimes a little longer. But it's more about like the stages of labor. So if you're pushing for a really long time, or if your active labor is really, really long and you don't seem like you're progressing to pushing, then that is what might make a provider, in whatever setting you're in, depending on the setting and depending on the provider, have doubts about you continuing that way. In home birth settings and birth center settings, they're much more relaxed. There is an element, every hospital is different, but there is an element in most hospitals of being a business and having a high demand of people moving in and out of rooms, and not really wanting laboring people to be laboring for long periods of time or to be pushing for long periods of time. There also isn't as much knowledge or tools available to people with OP babies or people with any sort of like positioning challenge with the baby in labor. So with the baby in the pelvis, when it's coming down, and it's kind of coming down in a funky way. And so we've had a few clients, and you are one of them, who we feel it's very likely if you were in a hospital, you would have had a cesarean, because it took a lot of extra work. It took a lot of extra guidance, a lot of extra positioning tools and techniques that is really a skill that only midwives carry. Yes, like some nurses carry, some OBs carry, but it's just not as common.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it would have been really possible. You're also more limited in those settings as well, to like how you can labor, and getting babies out that are in funky positions take a lot more transitioning, as you know, like transitioning positions and using different skills. Yeah,
I was moving all over this house. Yeah, just trying to find a way to get comfortable, and just, I mean, on top of that, so he chose to arrive at a convenient time, not just for my dad to be able to meet him, which he did, which was wonderful, but it was also a convenient time that my roommates and everyone weren't home. And it was convenient in that, because I remember when I was in my active labor and I was contracting and I was moaning, I thought to myself, I'm really glad that people who aren't on my birth team aren't here, because I would feel really self-conscious about how much noise I'm making right now. And especially like when I was actively pushing, I was like screaming, I was yelling, because it was just like, this is painful. And I feel like I'm really grateful to be in a setting where I felt safe to communicate myself verbally in a way that was conducive to me being able to move my baby out of me, because I don't think I would have felt that really in any other circumstance. I mean, not really in a hospital setting with people coming and going in the room, and you know, just like feeling concerned about like just like there being other people around. Like I knew that I was on the far end of the house, and if my roommates were home, they'd be on the far other end, but I still knew I would feel just as self-conscious knowing that these people on this complete other end of the house might potentially hear me. And so, you know, it's like I don't think everyone's self-conscious about things like that, but I know me, for my experience, I think it was important that I felt like I had the privacy I needed to be able to really dive into my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Sovereignty is huge. It's such an important piece to laboring, because labor really does, oh my gosh, he's so cute. Labor really does like send us into our primal state, and it's hard to be primal and wild if you've never been primal and wild before in front of strangers, because it's such a vulnerable thing to really step into that side of yourself, especially in a world where we all carry so much internalized misogyny, and we're domesticated, you know, in a way, and we're taught to not be wild and primal, and so to be like naked and oozing fluids out of your vagina and making really loud weird sounds that have never come out of you before is something that is hard to do around people that you love and trust, but even extra hard to do around total strangers.
Yeah. And you know, I just want to speak to like having a midwife. I haven't given birth in any other setting. I haven't had any other experiences, but from what I've heard from other women around me who have had more of an obstetrician end of the spectrum in terms of their care, I felt like I had like a full relationship with Crystal. I actually switched to her like really like at like the third trimester, but that's how great of a midwife she is, and how great midwives are in general, is that they will do what they can to make sure that they have a relationship with you. And I guess maybe be wary of a midwife who doesn't try to have a relationship with you, and because you know, the midwife I switched from, who was also incredibly wonderful, and I didn't switch from her for any failing on her part. It was just mostly because I wanted to be in a practice that you were in, because I wanted you, like I wanted you a part of it so much, and so it was that. But I mean, both of them, just like, they really make the effort to let you know that they're there for you, and they're there to hear your fears and your worries and everything. And it's just and I felt like this is a person I feel extremely comfortable with. This is someone I feel like I can be completely vulnerable with. She makes it easy for me to feel that way, and I think that's so important, to have that relationship with your midwife or with the person who's delivering your baby. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the great thing about midwifery, and of course everyone practices differently, this is a pretty generalized response, but most midwives do take 1 hour at every single appointment to get to know you and to do, like, we do the vitals and all the clinical stuff, and that only takes like 20 minutes. Right. And then after that, it's like, let's just talk about your birth plan and your situation and how you're feeling and what fears are coming up for you. And It's so much more of a holistic practice. And that's what women and all people bringing life into this world deserve.
Yeah.
Going in and like having someone listen to heart tones and take your vitals and be like, okay, bye, see you later. That's great. And that is definitely helpful, but it only covers one aspect of the bigger picture that so many people bringing life into the world are really, really missing.
Yeah.
You know, and building that trusting relationship with someone is so, it's so sacred and so vital, because you're handing over a huge piece of your power. There's an element of course, like being sovereign in your birth, which is to like hold your power at the center. But there's also a piece of giving the trust away of, I'm trusting you to take my baby's vitals, and I'm trusting you to know when to make the call that maybe something is not going right, or to give my baby emergency resuscitation, or to give me support in any capacity if the need arises. I'm giving a big piece of my life, you know, in your hands. And that's really big. And so to do that with someone who you see as someone that you trust, you know, and as a friend, is so much more, with of course a professional aspect, but most of our clients look to us in our practice as friends, or with like some sort of friendly capacity. And that's so important to forge, and I'm really glad that you got to have that with your midwife.
It was, I mean, I remember the conversation we had after my early labor had halted, and there the home visit, and I was just like kind of in a place where I was like, I think part of the reason it halted is I felt some trauma coming up, some trauma like returning, because I have sexual trauma that I'm still trying to understand. And because she was like, what do you think might be holding you back? And I brought that to her attention, and she spoke to me about it, and I don't even remember exactly what she said, but I just remember just feeling so nurtured by her words, and like what she had to provide for me in that space, and just feeling just like I just really grateful that I had made the choice to do home birth, and that I made the choice to have her as my midwife, and to have a midwife, and to work with people who feel so trauma informed and understanding of just like where people are coming from as they enter into this, because things like that do have an effect. Sexual trauma can have an effect on birthing, and or you know, or various traumas, I'm sure, can have an impact, and it's important to be able to recognize those and acknowledge them as you move forward toward going into active and early labor. Yeah, totally. And those things can come up in labor. I've seen some people, like, their labor stalls, and then they have to like go in another room and have a big cry, and then they come out and they have their baby. But like, it stirs emotions. It can really stir emotions, because so much energy is being like sent through your body, and all these energy centers are opening, and you're having an experience of stimulation in these areas that you probably haven't experienced stimulation in or around before, or in a long time. And so how could you release and process that, and be that vulnerable, that emotionally vulnerable, in the presence of people who you don't know very well or don't have a relationship with? It's a lot harder. I was wondering if we could touch on that piece, though, because there's something I wanted to share about that. I remember feeling like in your birth I was acting like a shamanic midwife, and because probably we've done so much spiritual work together and healing work together, but I was just like put into that role, and I was totally in like a psychedelic journey. In a way. Awesome.
It was really, really beautiful and really intense too, because I know your pain, and your pain and my pain is so similar. And so there were moments when you entered the pushing phase, and it was mainly in that hour of like trying to encourage you to push and doing that guidance, that I had to keep leaving. You probably didn't notice, but I had to keep leaving the house, and I had to leave the house in different doors. That just felt important. I had to go out the back door a couple times, and I had to go out the front door a couple times, and I was seeing a neon yellow orange color in just like leaving your body and like in the room and sort of like in that portal coming down. For anyone who doesn't understand, a shamanic midwife is someone who keeps like the spiritual portal open for the spirit of the child to come through. And so there were just these like globs of like neon orange color, a little green, and it just kept like splattering onto me, and I was like a magnet for it, not trying to be. It was just kind of happening, and I was like, all right, gotta go take this out of the room. So I just go in the back, and I had to be like this and like swipe it off my neck and swipe it off my heart and like reground. And then when I was like, okay, I'm good, and I came back in, and I had to do it again and again. And there was one point where I went outside and Crystal came out with me, and I had a big cry. And it was like your pain that was like triggering my pain that was all moving through me, and I was just had to like in that same energy and like seeing those neon colors, and I just cried this really, really big cry and like released like all this stuff, and then came back in and was present. And that was sort of my dance. And then after my big cry, that was the last time I went out and did that clearing. I came back in, and that's when you started actively pushing, and then I started my period.
Oh my god.
And it was so painful. I like usually don't have too intense cycles, but this one, it hurt so bad, and I wasn't expecting it. I didn't have any ibuprofen with me, which is what I usually take when I'm having a really intense cycle. And I looked all over your house for it, and I asked Danette, and Danette looked all over with me, and we couldn't find the ibuprofen anywhere. And I was like in total, not compared to your agony, but I was in my own state of agony. It's just physical pain of my uterus contracting and me bleeding a ton. And I was like, well, I guess this is what I'm being called to do.
Right.
So
oh my gosh.
my uterus was contracting with yours while you were
That's incredible.
your baby. Yeah.
it was, you know what? Honestly, it felt like it needed a team effort, because it was just like, how can one person just like push this giant head,
huge head,
between like this, like, and she was just hitting all the points wrong, and it was just so intense. And so thank you for kind of helping me kind of purging some of that for me.
It's such an honor.
What do you think that yellow light was? Or
the yellow goop.
Yeah.
It was more like goop. I don't know. Whenever I've seen your demons, I've seen them in neon colors.
Oh, interesting. That's how I see them when they kind of come through. It's very bright neon colors, and that's what it looks like to me. And it's not too dissimilar from like the art Tristan makes. It's very bright and colorful, and like purples, yellows, greens. Green is a big one, and it's just neon, and it's just really intense. And like I remember those colors presenting themselves to me at the end of my first experience of early labor, before it ended. And that's when I started to get, because that was the moment I started to get scared, because I was like, this is kind of scaring me right now, because I don't want to go into that space of having to deal with that trauma, because I'm trying to bring my son into this world. And those are like, that's basically, you got it pretty much down. Those are the colors that my trauma kind of sits in, which is really interesting.
I wonder if it's because of the sacral chakra and the power chakra, right? The orange and the yellow.
Yeah.
That's the only, and the green, the heart, that's the only connection I can think of.
Yeah, that's what I can think of too. Yeah.
Yeah. The trauma just really felt like sexual trauma.
Yeah.
And I felt it in myself too, because we have similar traumas.
Yeah,
so
we do.
Yeah. But remember what you said about your baby healing herself from the inside out?
Yeah, that's what it, just sitting in a meditation, group meditation, and this message came through to me while I was pregnant, which was like, I feel like I'm being, like, this trauma that was sitting in my womb, because I felt like in the years leading up to conceiving this child, I felt like I was clearing out my womb of sexual trauma, because I felt like I was holding on to a lot of trauma and just holding on to it in there. And, you know, it kind of transformed the way I had my periods. It transformed a lot of chronic stomach pain I was having to go through that process. Like I had chronic stomach pain that dissipated as I was doing this process of healing my womb. I would have excessive bloating in my uterus, which would subside as I did processing and then moving it through, and then as I was pregnant with him and I was sitting in this meditation, I was thinking to myself, oh my God, I feel like he is just this beaming light, and that here I was worried that like the scars and the wounds of my sexual trauma were going to harm my child within my womb because they exist within my womb. But instead, he is so bright and so light that he's healing those scars and those wounds for me. Mm-hmm. because he, you know, babies are pure light. How can, like, you can't harm a human soul. You can harm a human body, you can harm a human's mentality and their emotion. You can harm all of that, but when it comes to the actual like soul body, you can't harm that. And a baby is the epitome of ultimate soul body. Like before really like becoming like the human with all the baggage and all that stuff. And so it felt as if, you know, this is the pure light that is kind of washing away what I've been holding on to. And I mean, I still have processes to do, you know, just like any other woman who's had the privilege of being able to carry a child. But it did feel like I could stop worrying that my trauma would become his trauma, because I knew that he was, in a way, by existing in my womb, he was washing it away for me. And just feeling really a lot of gratitude about that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Powerful. Yeah. And that brings it all back to joy, which was your intention for your birth.
Which, you know, daring, you know, and when I think about it in retrospect, I'm like, man, that was not a joyful birth. But then I look at the photos, and there's so many photos of me smiling between contractions. And I'm like, oh, so there was like, it was there, but it was really difficult. But it was like also just like really wonderful and beautiful in the hard processes that it required. And and I think a friend of mine told me, like, you have been building up your stamina for years by doing these healing processes and by working out all the time and by doing all these things. And it was like your body, you were just given the opportunity to do the biggest marathon you could possibly do. And I was like, okay, I can accept that. But I feel in spite of how difficult it all was, I got to keep my birth plan, which I think is the greatest privilege in the world, because not everyone gets to keep their birth plan, and I did, and I'm really, really grateful for that. And a huge thanks to you and Crystal and Jane, Danette. Like, I mean, everyone just came together, and Rachel just came together and held space so well that I think I almost, like, I fear of it being any other way, like any other circumstance or any other setting, that like maybe it wouldn't have gone the way I hoped, but it happened in just the way I needed it to, and I'm really, really grateful for that. Thank you so much for listening to that interview with Victoria Kelson and Jay Martin and I, Kelsey Martin. And yes, it does kind of stop abruptly because our recording equipment failed us. But I think, I think it hits a good conclusion. We just don't really conclude necessarily, but that's fine. That placenta that you see in the pictures? Yeah, I ate that. Highly recommend it. I don't recommend it in terms of flavor. I put it in my smoothies. Maybe capsule it. I don't know. Whatever floats your boat. But it's actually really good for you to eat the placenta. And I'm going to have an interview with Victoria Kelson again in the near future where we talk more about the postpartum period and we can get into placenta eating and different ways you can nourish yourself postpartum. Final note, this podcast isn't intended to be some kind of like bragging about like, oh, my birth plan went perfectly, or look at all of these things I got to do. It's intended to kind of paint a picture of what home birth looks like. It's intended to affirm that low-risk pregnancies are safe for home birth and that home birth in general should be more accessible to women and birthing people. I received a lot of criticism for choosing to home birth while I was pregnant, as did Victoria. We both received a lot of criticism for that, sometimes from family members, sometimes from friends, sometimes from friends of friends, family members of friends. I wanted to present my story with factual information included so people could understand that this doesn't have to be a pipe dream of an experience. This isn't someone going off into the hinterlands to birth a baby because it's their dream. It's not about that. It's about creating a safe and comfortable environment so that people who are birthing can feel vulnerable and can feel like they can actually dive into their process and feel what they need to feel and do what they need to do to bring their baby into this world. And that's the most important thing to me. Victoria Kelson's Birth Untethered childbirth education is about sovereignty. It's about whether you're birthing in a hospital or birthing at home or in a birth center, wherever. It's so important that women feel like they have a voice in the care they receive. And when those voices are taken away, that's where a lot of trauma comes from. And we need to trust our women more. And yeah, thank you.